I feel like you're a long way away. If there's anything that's on the slides that you can't see or if you can't hear me at any point, just yell something at me and I'll try and clarify things. My name is Woolley and I'm from Victoria. I'm a PhD student at Victoria University. Do I need to use this?
Yes.
PhD student at Victoria University, and I'm speaking on behalf of the pecan lizard team. And looking today at a review that we've just finished doing about the past, present, and potential lizard faunas of New Zealand cities. This is a picture of a copper skink in Wellington, out of Wellington Harbour. Urban processes tend to have a negative effect on native biodiversity. This is a recent development site in Wellington. There was a reasonably large skink population there. And it's a cycleway they're putting through. We actually did a salvage operation and moved those skinks to another site. Cities are hard places for animals to live, but they're not entirely sterile environments. They can offer opportunities for restoration and even conservation of some vulnerable species. And increasingly there's a desire to enrich cities with native biodiversity. And one group which until recently has been reasonably overlooked in terms of restoration is the native lizards. New Zealand has a huge diversity of native lizards. We're over 100 species in 2 families, and that's very, very large compared to other countries in a temperate region. Over 100 species of combined skinks and geckos, and many of these are threatened and range restricted. A lot of the issues that Bruce was talking about, habitat loss is a really major factor, but also invasive pest mammals. And not only rats and mustelars, things that people often think of as birds, but other smaller mammals like hedgehogs and mice, cats, obviously a really big problem. And as a result, a lot of species have become threatened and range restricted. This is the robust skink, they can get up to 30 centimetres nose to tail. And they were historically widespread across the whole North Island. There's subfossil remains found all the way down in Wellington, but today they're only found on offshore islands off the coast of Auckland. But that's not to say that there are no lizards in cities. We know from anecdotal reports that there are lizards in cities, and since starting my PhD, I've been a very happy recipient of lots and lots of photos. People love sending me photos of lizards they see in their backyard and hope that I can identify them. I usually can't. But the top photo here was sent by a chap who was clearing out rubbish from a gully near his place, and he found a discarded car seat, and it was being used as a masking surface for a few skinks. And the other one's my absolute favourite, which is a retractable clothesline box, and there's 4 geckos swimming in there. And I'll enlarge this one just peeking over the top. So we know that geckos and skinks are existing in cities, but we don't know very much about these populations. We don't know what species there are in urban locations, we don't know what sort of habitats they're existing in, and we don't know anything about their population trends. So that's what the Pecan project is looking at. I'm going to talk today about a review that we've the first step in the process, which is looking at comparing historical lizard distributions around the regions of cities with what we know about the current distributions of lizards in cities. So I focused on 6 New Zealand cities: Auckland, Hamilton, Wellington in the North Island, and Nelson, Christchurch, and Dunedin in the South Island. And at the same time, in addition to this review, there's been a whole lot of lizard monitoring happening in Hamilton and Wellington, Nelson and Dunedin. So let's talk about the review at the moment. The first question was to find out historically what lizards could we have expected to be existing in cities prior to human colonisation. Secondly, what lizards are currently present in each of the cities. And then thirdly, to have a think about what sort of opportunities there are for lizards in cities moving forward. And the first thing we had to do in this process was to work out exactly what we mean by urban. It was no good to use the administrative boundaries of cities because they're too variable and they don't mean very much ecologically. And so we ended up using the land cover database, and that divides aerial photographs into classes of land cover. This is for Wellington City. And we simplified that down into 9 categories that were ecologically relevant for lizards. And that allowed us to estimate the total proportion of different land covers within the city, and also to estimate an urban core. And because it's a standard urban core, it meant that we could use that as a cookie cutter for each city and sort of cut out the records of all lizards occurring within those regions and compare like with like. And in case you're interested, I did do this process for New Plymouth, and that's what it came up with. I hope that's intuitively what people might think of as the region of urban cover around Plymouth. The process, it takes the urban polygons and aggregates them together where they fall within a particular distance threshold. So if there's small satellite communities which are urban on the fringes, it depends how far away they are, whether they get lumped in with the urban core or not. So that's that. One of the big challenges we had was inferring what was there historically, because lizard distributions around New Zealand have changed so dramatically with changes in land cover. We had to make some inferences. This is the distribution for the robust game. Not sure, hopefully you can see the points. The blue ones which represent fossil remains or subfossil remains, and the red ones are records that actually exist of live specimens. So you can see the dramatic changes in distribution. We used biogeographical categories. Every lizard is assigned to a biogeographical category, and that gave us a starting point for trying to work out what would have been where around the cities. And then, in addition to this, we removed a few species where there were closely related species in the same city. If there were records that were too far away or separated by a known boundary from the urban location. And if a species had specific habitat requirements, so if it was an alpine gecko, we wouldn't have included that unless the city was in an alpine environment. Did I say alpine? Alpine. For the current faunas, we used a number of sources. We tried to extract and collate together as much information as we could from a wide variety of sources. There's a reasonably comprehensive petafauna database, which has records dating back almost 100 years for lizards and other reptiles around New Zealand. That's managed by DOC. We also did a survey of published research and spoke to councils who often referred us to contract herpetologists or DOC officers to try and gather together reports or biodiversity surveys. Our literature search, focusing on all cities in New Zealand, turned up only 6 published articles. There's very little research going on in the space. And speaking with councils and other related people, we found some master species, reports from salvage operations, biosecurity, and a few biodiversity surveys, but not very many in urban locations. And the most comprehensive source for information was the Dr. Petafauna database. There were no species records in these regions that turned up that weren't present in the Petafauna database. So this is what we found. These are some results. Historically, nearly 40%, so that's because there's over 100 species, that's about 40 lizard species, are likely to have occurred in one of those 6 cities. So that's, in terms of the area that those cities takes up, that's quite good bang for your buck in terms of species coverage. 45% of species occurred in only one of the city's regions, and that indicates that there's quite high regional endemicity, species that are only found in one particular region and not other regions. And 6 out of 7 lizard genera are represented. The only one that wasn't is a genus which is only found on Rakiura. And 68% of species are classified at risk, 20% is threatened. So over 80% have some sort of threat classification. And comparing that with the current situation, we found that all 6 cities have at least one lizard species still around. So that's positive, but that on the whole, all of them have lost some species. 60% of the species historically found in cities haven't been recorded in cities over the last 20 years. In these graphs, hopefully you can see the one on the left is for geckos and the one on the right is for snakes. The cities are along the bottom from north to south, and the total height of the bar is the number of species that were present historically in cities. The dark grey portion is the number of species that is currently still found in those cities. The grey portion is the number that's been lost from those cities. So some quite big declines, particularly in Auckland for skinks, in Hamilton skinks, and actually Hamilton for geckos, not much going on there. And also the majority of species lost were local endemics. We tried to look for reasons why this might be, to sort of explain these patterns. And so we did look at the proportion land covers for the different cities. The graph on the left-hand side is showing the proportion of urban land cover versus non-urban land cover. I didn't have time to do the analysis for when you come up, unfortunately, but it would have been interesting to compare. And the graph on the right is showing a breakdown of those different non-urban land covers. So the green portions are different sorts of scrub, either indigenous or exotic. The yellow bars, which are quite prominent, are exotic grassland. Orange is horticulture, black is gravel, and the blue portions are wetland areas. It's highly variable among the cities, and there was no really clear pattern explaining it. And we also looked at species characteristics to try and work out if there was any intrinsic characteristics about the lizards that made particular species become extinct from cities. We looked at body size, reproductive output, whether it was a skink or a gecko, and habitat specialization. And the only thing we found some weak evidence for was size being a factor. And that is in keeping with the loss of species from mainland New Zealand in the presence of mammals. Large lizards don't tend to cope as well. We found that large-bodied animals, species, were more likely to be lost. So looking at forward, what's the potential for urban restoration in cities? We found that a large proportion of species could be candidates for restoration in cities. There's a variety of genuses, size, activity pattern, habitat use, and lots of species that are threatened or at risk. And that means that restoration in cities could offer excellent representation of national lizard diversity and make important contributions to species conservation. 4 specific opportunities I'll just break down. Don't make me move time. The gold standard, I guess, for opportunities in cities for lizards is probably urban sanctuaries. Because these have such a commitment to long-term predator control, and also they can allow the growth of existing populations and can receive translocations of lost species. Urban reserves can also offer opportunities, and increasingly the lizard values are beginning to be understood for some reserves. Often there's through community groups or councils, there's good commitment to predator control in these spaces. And these could potentially receive translocations from salvaged lizards from development sites. Those first two are kind of what you might think of as green spaces. In cities, you go to a park, you go for a walk or something. Cities also have informal green spaces, which are often more marginal, but can be really good habitat for lizards. That cycleway project I talked about at the very beginning, where we moved a whole lot of animals, was an environment that you wouldn't have thought necessarily you'd find any lizards at. It was very scrubby and very small, very narrow. And these sorts of areas, and also along the edge of a main motorway. And these sorts of areas can also provide opportunities. Because lizards can occupy small patches of adequate habitat at quite high densities, they can be found in wood backyards. And so initiatives such as lizard gardening and community trapping can be beneficial. And a few points for research. We need to continue to build knowledge about where populations exist in cities and establish baselines so that we can assess future trends of lizard populations. We should try and understand what's required of predator control and what the responses might be from lizards if you remove particular mammals and not others, and that ties in with potential mesopredator and competitive release from controlled species. So I need to thank those individuals, contributed data, and a number of organisations who are very, very supportive. Those are the institutions, the people involved in this project. and we've recently published this work. So if you're interested, you can find the information. Thank you.